Good morning. Welcome to the Office of Enforcement Compliance Assurance's Basic Records Management Training Session. During this session, we will cover records identification, the records life cycle, records scheduling, records labels, and OECA's records management support. Let's look at how to identify a record. The management of federal records is required by law, and as an agency and federal employees, we must make and keep records, train employees on how to manage the records they create, and have an appropriate records management program in place for the long term. As a federal employee, it is our responsibility to create and preserve all records that document activities for which we're responsible. We must identify all of our records and keep them separate from non-records, and follow the proper disposition indicated in the record schedule. So what is a record? In short, a record is any information resource in any format that is created in the course of business, is received for an action, or is needed to document your activities and decisions. So what is not considered a record? Personal papers, reference materials, convenience copies, draft documents, and working papers are generally not considered records. Two common questions that we receive: is this a personal paper, non-record, or a federal record? And how long do I need to keep this information? Another question that we have is my working papers and draft materials considered a record? Well, working papers and draft materials, especially those that have comments, are not considered records only if they are not circulated for official purposes and do not contain unique substantial information, and they're not needed to document the decision-making process, or are not described elsewhere under a requirement to be retained. So how do I determine whether or not I have a federal record? Let's take a look at a couple of tools. This is an example of a cheat sheet that you can use that's located on OECA's intranet website. Here it gives you a description of a type of record and the circumstances for which the record is created. For example, if you get a FOIA request and it's received for action, then it's commonly considered a record. Or you have an administrative record that is mandated by statutes or regulation. Something like this might be considered a record. If you have a convenience copy and it's a duplicate copy of a correspondence or a directive or an EPA publication, then it may not be considered a record. Or draft documents that do not have any substantial revisions or comments are generally not considered records. Here's another tool that you can use to help you determine if the material you have is a record. This is an example of a flowchart. In this flowchart, it presents a series of yes or no questions that you should answer that will lead you to a non-record or a record status. It's a good idea to print this material out. It's all located on EPA's intranet site. Hang it in your area and refer back to it when you have the question of whether the document you have is or isn't a record. On EPA's website, there's also an interactive tool located under Tools, Getting Started, and its name is What is a Record? This tool will guide you through a series of questions, yes or no based, and will lead you to a record status or a non-record status.